Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. For watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we will be heading over to the American Athletic Conference and taking a look at the Memphis Tigers, who finished 11-2 last season and capped off their season with a win in the Miami Beach Bowl. They wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with their spring game on April 26th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is the beat reporter for the Memphis Tigers and the Memphis Grizzlies at Memphis News. He never gets too high. He never gets too low. He is Jonah Dillon. Jonah can be found on X at the Jonah Dillon. Welcome to the show, Jonah.
Wow, I don't know if I deserve that kind of incredible introduction, but I'm fired up. I'm ready to go.
I mean, it's just something I started this year. Did it a couple times, and people seem to love it. Gets you jacked after getting that intro in there.
Yeah, now I'm ready to go. Now I'm like, okay, I got to live up to the I got to meet whatever I got from that intro. So the bar is pretty high.
Well, for those people just joining into the G5 Hive for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How long you've been covering Memphis football?
Yeah, so let's see, almost 2 years now. I've been in Memphis with the commercial appeals, and this will be what's coming up is the third football season. I started right before the 2023 season, so I've kind of seen the different levels of expectation because that was when I got here. They were coming off back-to-back 6-6 seasons, and now coming off back-to-back double-digit win seasons. And so it's been interesting to see how this program has grown, obviously with the changing AAC. And then, I also help out with Grizzlies coverage, Tigers basketball. I did a bunch of stuff with them this year. So always busy around something in Memphis.
Well, moving over to the Memphis football team, for those not familiar with the Memphis offensive style, how would you describe it to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it changes, and I think it's going to change. I'm sure we'll get into it this year. But Tim Cramsey, the offensive coordinator, has kind of historically been the type of offensive coordinator who molds his offensive scheme around his quarterback skill set. And so for the last 4 years, we've seen a very specific skill set for Seth Hennigan's talents and his abilities and the things that he does well. And obviously that's going to change with Seth Hennigan leaving this year. But it is a pro style offense. You see a lot of spread stuff. It's not like you're going to see under center that much. And he's going to try to spread things out, and speed is the thing, especially kind of going into this year and the spring. We've heard the most is that speed is going to be utilized. There's going to be a lot of side to side movement and things like that. But yeah, this offense is going to be different than it has been the past couple of years. I feel pretty confident about that.
Well, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. The man, the myth, the legend, Seth Hennigan is off to the NFL, and Memphis fans are in a spot they are not used to, and that's who will be our quarterback in week one. Hennigan had started for Memphis since he was a true freshman in 2021. During that time, he won 34 games. He took the team to 4 straight bowl games, won 3 consecutive bowl game MVPs. That's the past. Now let's turn our attention to 2025. The only other quarterback last season to take a snap, Harris Boyd, is in the portal. However, they brought back a talented youngster in Arrington Maiden. They also signed a freshman that was all the buzz during the season, A.J. Hill. And to cap it off, the Tigers also brought in Brendan Lewis from Nevada. While Tiger fans will not have Seth to lead the team this season, the Tigers have a pretty good situation here. What should we make of this intriguing quarterback situation heading into the 2025 season?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. You laid it out there. Those 3 guys, they feel really confident with all 3 of them. I think they were confident in Harris Boyd, too. I talked to Tim Cramsey before spring practices, and he said, I'm confident that all 4 of those guys can start at this level in the American. And so I think there's a potential for, some of those guys to start at other places, obviously in the portal where we are now. You never know when people are going to leave and pop up at other schools. I think Brendan Lewis has kind of clearly been the front runner throughout the spring to get that spot. And it's because of the experience that everybody else that you mentioned has basically never played. And if you look at their roster, they added 2 other quarterbacks who have also never taken a snap in college. And so you're looking at somebody who's started more than 30 games, and then 4 people who have a combined, I think, 1 snap in college. And that was on a trick play that Arrington Maiden ran last year against UTSA that went awry. So it wasn't even a successful play. It was not his fault. But so I think when you look at the quarterback competition, that's what he came in with, Brendan Lewis, and throughout the spring, it feels like that's kind of still where it is that this guy, somebody who, by the way, graduated high school a year before Seth Hennigan. This is his 6th year of college. Seth Hennigan played 4 years of college. So he's older than Seth Hennigan, which obviously kind of feels weird. Seth Hennigan being off to the NFL and Brendan Lewis still in college. He started at multiple places. And basically it's been kind of set up as his job to lose throughout the spring and then as we get into the summer.
Well, those not familiar with Lewis's game, how would you describe it?
Yeah, he's a dual threat quarterback. So he's very much a run threat constantly. I think he rushed for something like 800 yards last year at Nevada, a team that was not very successful, but he played well enough that when he went in the portal, he had a good amount of options. He was deciding between Memphis, Northwestern, and Oregon State. And so there's a lot of schools that were after him, and he's somebody who was a big time recruit out of high school. When he went to Colorado in the first place, he was really highly touted. So it's going to be about the RPO game. It's going to be about runs. It's going to be about getting him on the edge and moving him around. And so that's kind of, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, like the offense is going to be different because that's not Seth Hennigan's skill set, right? And so obviously Brandon Lewis can do the things, sit in the pocket and make those types of throws, but I think we're going to see a lot more movement. We're going to see a lot more side to side. We're going to see a lot more getting the quarterback on the edge and kind of seeing what happens and allowing him to make decisions outside of the pocket and while he's on the run. And so that skill set, I think, is something for Tigers fans and everyone to kind of get to know as we head into the season, because it is going to look different when you get to August 30th against Chattanooga.
So you mentioned that offense looking different. Does that also lend itself to whoever is going to get this backup role? We talked about the inexperience there. Who's got the leg up for this number 2 spot?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a good question too, because like I said, I mean, look, we talked about Brendan Lewis. At the same time, Brendan Lewis has not been named the starter and he has not won the starting job. And so it's possible that he's not going to be the starter. I don't think it's 100% by any stretch. I just think that, if you ask me right now, who is it going to be? I would say Brendan Lewis. As for 2 and 3, that kind of becomes another interesting question if he is the number 1, because you've got AJ Hill, who I'm sure we'll get to, is extremely highly touted as a recruit, but he's also very raw in terms of his skill set, right? He has a lot of room to grow, kind of grow into his body, all sorts of different things in terms of what made him such a high recruit and why people are so excited about his future. Arrington Maiden has had a year in the system, and I would kind of put him in between AJ Hill and Brendan Lewis in terms of his skill set. He is a big kid. He's big and strong. He can throw the ball pretty far. He's more mobile than AJ is, but he doesn't have the same arm that he has. He's not as mobile as Brendan, but he can also sit in the pocket and do that. And we saw that if you go back and look at his high school tape, he can sit there and kind of uncork long throws. And we also saw that in the spring game. He was the best, kind of the standout in the spring game among everybody. And it was the long throws that stood out the most. And so if you're going to end up feeling, okay, this guy's been in the program for a year, so we feel confident, if we need to throw him into a game if somebody gets injured, I could see that, even if you don't think that he's the future. But at the same time, he's somebody that has every opportunity to do that. So I think the way that they handle all 3 of those guys is going to be interesting. Even though people obviously want to talk about who the starter is, who the backup is will be an interesting storyline too.
I talked about, kind of all the buzz at the beginning of the season there was around AJ Hill or Antoine Hill. Those not familiar with AJ Hill, can you share kind of why this was such a big deal to land him for Memphis and what fans should expect regarding his play style?
Yeah, so I mean, he's a 4-star recruit. Memphis doesn't get a lot of 4-star recruits, and if you look at recruiting rankings, it's hard to know, I'm going to go by this, go by that, and then only go back so far. But he is one of the highest ranked recruits Memphis has ever gotten. And people are, who was after him? But if you look at his offers, he had an offer from basically every school. He was at one time committed to Colorado. He decommitted, and so obviously Colorado was after him. And then right at the end, it was between Florida and Memphis. Those were the 2 schools that were really, really going after him. And like ultimately, when he made his decision, those were the 2 kind of finalists. And so that obviously tells you the level that he's at. Now, had he gone to Florida, there was not a pathway for him to play immediately or even next season because of DJ Lagway. And so that kind of maybe is one of the reasons why he ended up at Memphis. There's also the potential. We've talked about Seth Hennigan a million times. He's going to be someone we talk about all season because of his impact. He's the all-time leading passer. He started as a true freshman. And so that shows somebody like AJ Hill that, hey, there is a chance if you come here, you can have a chance to start as a true freshman. And he also, he committed and he signed before Brendan Lewis came here. Memphis was always going to bring in somebody with experience in the portal. Now, whether that was going to be a backup or a starter level player, I guess was kind of up for debate. It ends up being somebody who started a lot of games. So he's had the opportunity to start. At the same time, you're talking about somebody who's came to campus and went through spring practice as a 17-year-old. And so, like I said, he has a lot of developing to do. He's very much a pocket passer and very much a like, look at this guy's arm and how far he can throw the ball. And that's the reason his build and kind of the way that he moves and the way he throws the ball, those are the things that make him such a highly touted recruit. And those are the things that, even depending on what happens this season, if he doesn't play this season, he's still going to be somebody that people are very high on for his future of his college career.
So we talked about, I guess you talked about if you had to pick today, Brendan Lewis is your starter. What would you handicap that at, like in this moment here at the end of May?
I mean, like odds?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Or,
I would say
percentage might be easier.
Yeah, percentage maybe. Like I would say 75% probably. And I say that, yeah, go for it.
So if he's got at 75%, like what is it that the number two, whoever that is, whether it's Maiden, whether it's Hill, what is it that they would bring to the team that just stands out that would like kind of force them into being started over Brendan Lewis?
Yeah, so I think for either one. So for AJ, it would be this kid got to campus and we saw what he looked like, and we've never seen anything like this, and he has to play. That could be possible. Again, he's not somebody, you look at recruits, right? There's a lot of recruits where it's like this guy's ready to play day one, regardless of if he's a 3-star recruit or a 4-star recruit or whatever. That's not, if you look at everybody who recruited AJ Hill, they did not recruit him to be a day one starter just because he's not viewed as that kind of a player. It doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve to be a highly touted recruit because people agree with all that stuff. But look, if he got to campus and they said, this kid is different than we thought maybe when we recruited him, or he's just progressed so quickly, he's going to be the guy. And then with Arrington Maiden, I know they've been very high on him since he got here last year. Like this is somebody, there were people last year in the program saying this is the future of the Memphis football program is Arrington Maiden. And I think people have looked at him as kind of like he's just a third guy. He's going to transfer in the spring, or he's not going to be part of this going forward. Like he's somebody who wanted to stay and he wanted to compete. And you bring in Brendan Lewis, you saw what he did at other places, but if you're Memphis, you haven't seen him, practice, you haven't seen him run the playbook or whatever. And so it's possible that they looked at what Arrington Maiden did last year and they compared it with those two guys. And they said, Brendan Lewis isn't at that level, or he's not doing what we thought he was going to do, or Arrington Maiden has just progressed, so far again in the last year that he's gotten there. And so I think all those guys had chances throughout the spring to earn that spot and will continue to have chances as they get to the summer.
Well, moving on to the running game, and boy, did those transfers make an impact for the Tigers. First team all-conference Mario Anderson from South Carolina was huge all season long a year ago, and a healthy Greg DeRosiers Jr. from UMass really popped at the end of the year for Memphis. Brandon Thomas was also big for the Tigers inside the 10 as he racked up 9 touchdowns on the season. Well, Thomas and Anderson have both graduated, so the Tigers will be searching to replace 1,694 rushing yards and 27 touchdowns on the ground. DeRosiers, Makari Bodford, and Sutton Smith all return in 2025. Did anyone kind of stand out in the spring, and do you think we get a Mario Anderson type workhorse again here in 2025?
Yeah, it was tough during the spring because Sutton Smith, I'm sure we'll get to it, he was out during the spring, so he wasn't practicing, and we're expecting him to play a big role. I don't think there's going to be a Mario Anderson type workhorse. I don't think that they wanted that wasn't the plan last year. We know that pretty definitively. They wanted it to be a split between Sutton Smith and Mario Anderson. And Mario Anderson showed that he could handle that carry load, which he did, and was carrying the ball 20, 25 times a game and was able to do it. I don't think they want to have that type of a bell cow, especially because the two guys that are going to lead this are not the type of players that you want to carry the ball 25 times a game, given their injury history and given their builds. And so I wouldn't expect that. I think that they're really excited about what they have in that room in terms of like diversity of different types of players and then the depth also. But guess right now, assuming everybody stays healthy, which is obviously a big assumption, I don't think we're going to see a bell cow type 25 carry a game type player.
If it's going to be a committee of all these three, maybe can you talk about the different skill sets and maybe what they each bring that's different and how they might be used in a game?
Yeah, so Makari Bodford is the guy that would be kind of the Brandon Thomas type player. He wasn't going to play at all last year. I wouldn't expect. He was a true freshman. I don't think they wanted him to play. And then they had injuries to basically everybody. And he ended up having one game where he came in and was basically the only healthy running back available while he was, trying to redshirt. It was one of those like, hey, get your helmet and get in the game. And he had a crazy drive where he basically carried the ball every single play and rushed for like 70 yards and a touchdown, while everybody in the stands was doing the like, who's number 21? What's this kid's name? Type thing. And people were very excited about him. And then he didn't, once Mario Anderson came back and Brandon Thomas and Greg Dwozey were healthy, he didn't play a lot, which was understandable. Again, that wasn't the plan. I think going into this year, people obviously they know who he is now, and with Brandon Thomas leaving, that role is available, and I think he's the one who's most equipped to handle it. And I think they knew that going into the season. Some people were. Rashad Amos was here as a transfer from Ole Miss in the spring for a couple of weeks, but that's one of those where everybody kind of within Memphis was saying like, this guy's not going to be in the rotation because they have Makari Bodiford and they feel confident about him. I know that it kind of turned heads because he was really good at the Group of 5 level a couple years ago. He came from Ole Miss, but that was one where like looking at the 3 guys that Memphis had, I think people were kind of expecting those 3 guys to be the top 3 no matter what, unless they brought in somebody crazy. So, and again, they didn't go after. It was pretty telling. They didn't go after big time running backs, and Memphis. Basically, if they want to get a big-time running back in the portal, they can, right? Blake Watson, Mario Anderson, the last 2 years, they've done that because they felt like they needed to. They didn't feel like they needed to this year, and so that's a big tell. Sutton Smith and Greg Dwozey, similar type players. It's not going to be a thunder and lightning type, backfield that you kind of hear about usually with running backs. They both do similar types of things. I think we're going to see them play together. I think we're going to see them line up in the slot, especially Greg Dwozey. We're going to see them on punt returns, on kick returns. They're both really, really dynamic players. They're highlight reel type players. Both of them, if you just look at the best plays of Memphis this season, I would say 2 years ago, it was Sutton Smith in the Liberty Bowl, kind of ridiculous touchdown. And last year was probably Greg Dwozey's ridiculous juke move against Tulane. There was a Tulane defender who was kind of just sitting down on his butt by the end of the play, wondering what happened. And those guys are, if they're healthy, I mean, this is the strength of the team, and it's going to be really interesting and exciting to see them kind of work together.
Well, as you mentioned, Sutton Smith suffered a right knee injury against North Alabama, and he was out this spring. But what can you tell us about his recovery and when they expect him to be ready for 2025?
Yeah, so like you said, he played less than a quarter of last season. He wasn't fully healthy during the spring, but I did see him out there kind of warming up before the spring game, and it's not like he's wearing a brace or anything, so he looked good. And they've said they expect him to be a full go before training camp starts, which means you would think day one of the season he's in the rotation. There's nothing, no problems with like conditioning or anything, and so I would expect him to be a full go once they get ready for the season.
Given the fact that you got 3 capable running backs, if you had to guess today, which of those get that first carry against Chattanooga, who would that be?
I would go Sutton Smith. I think also just the coaches are going to want to have him be the guy right at the beginning, right? So that he can kind of get back. And I'm sure it's going to be, mentally it's going to be weird for him going up in the first game of the season like he did last year and kind of a nondescript carry to the side. And then you have that knee injury and you don't play the rest of the season. And so I think I would expect, I think he's going to get the ball. The first drive, I think they're going to give him the ball almost every play. I think that would be their plan. They basically did that last year as kind of a tell of how much they wanted to involve him in the offense. I think that's probably going to be the start of the season too.
Well, let's move over to the wide receiving room. And this room's going to look a lot different here in 2025. We saw their top 4 receivers graduate: Demir Blankumsey, Kobe Drake. You got Jair Shorter and first-team All-Conference Rock Taylor. That quartet combined for 2,338 yards and 9 touchdowns, while accounting for all but 31 of the wide receiver targets a season ago. The Tigers returned 3 guys who registered a catch in 2024. You have a youngster like Keandre Henry and in the wings, and then the staff brought in 3 transfers. What should we make of this wide receiver unit heading into the season?
Yeah, that's kind of the question right now is like who's gonna catch the passes, right? Because we just went through the running back room and feeling so confident with the room and the depth and everything that they bring to the table, and then with the receivers, it's kind of like let's see what happens when they get out there in that first game. There's a lot of obviously, like you said, there's new names to know. Brady Cluse is the biggest kind of returning name to know, I think, because again, somebody who they weren't expecting to play a lot last year kind of came on towards the end of the season as a true freshman. Pretty rare for true freshmen to be playing significant roles at Memphis. And so anytime that happens, people kind of, okay, that's somebody I should know. Guys who've done it in the past, Sutton Smith, Seth Hennigan, Greg Rubin. So they usually do pretty well in their careers. I think in terms of the transfers, CJ Smith, somebody definitely to know from Purdue, kind of that speed threat. Jaden Thompson, another person who was injured during the spring, kind of will be a theme as we go through this, which makes it hard to kind of glean that much from spring practice. And then Jakari Caldwell, another guy coaches have talked about, very excited about. Keondae Henry, who you mentioned, was the highest ranked recruit in last year's recruiting class. And he was a 4-star recruit, somebody who, they I wouldn't say stole, but they got him instead of a lot of power conference teams that were trying to get him. And so there's a lot of talent in that room. There's not a lot of production, even the transfers, not a lot of guys coming in who have had 1,000-yard seasons or anything like that. And so it is going to be a wait and see type of thing of who rises during the preseason time and then who's able to kind of assert themselves once they get to the start of the season.
All right. So from what you've been able to see in the spring and vibes and feels around the team, there's a lot of targets that are vacant in 2024. How do you see them getting divided up here?
Yeah, I mean, this is one, like, when we do odds, like, there's no odds on favorite to be the number one receiver, I feel like, which is weird, right? Because like last year when we did this, it was like Rock Taylor, right? And there's not even a question. And even I could have told you 100% who the number 2 was and who the number 3 was. Now I can't tell you any of that. I think Brady Cluse, again, that's the guy that coaches talk about. Really, they speak really, really highly of him in his development. We saw last year what he did, but they're saying that he's taken even another step, having kind of another spring. And now there's also a void in terms of leadership, right? Because last year those guys were the leaders, and that was kind of the pecking order in the room. And now somebody like Brady Cluse, obviously he's only a true sophomore, so he's not one of the older guys in the room, but he is coming back and returning. And so when you have transfers coming in, they don't know the program, they don't know the expectations or how things operate. And so somebody who is coming back, even if it's only 1 year, ends up having a really significant impact on kind of the culture of the room and how things break down. And so I think he's definitely a candidate to be the number one receiver and to get the most targets. I think CJ Smith, somebody we saw in the spring game, he had a really long touchdown. He's going to be that deep threat, but how many catches is he going to get? Usually deep threat, you're not talking about someone who's getting the most targets or catching the most balls just because you're targeting them in specific ways. And then we'll see with the other guys. I mentioned Jakari Caldwell, Jaden Thompson, guys like that, how big of an impact they have. I wouldn't be surprised if any of those guys or even somebody else is the number one receiver, but I think those guys are the most likely.
So you talked about the option game. We're not sure exactly what this wide receiver room looks like. We've got a really good depth here in the running back room. Do you just think we see a more run-heavy approach from Memphis in 2025?
I think so. I think, again, going back to quarterback, assuming Brendan Lewis is the quarterback, I think that kind of plays into it more of, okay, let's run the ball because we have so many threats to do that. I think they're going to be creative with it, though. I think you're going to see options. I think you're going to see, even in the spring game, we saw a lot of like receivers catching jet sweeps and things like that, like guys running side to side and those types of plays, short passes. So I think we're going to see different kind of offense. I think, like you said, it is going to lean on the run game. And then we'll see how, like, if they find something in the past game or people are consistently doing stuff, I think they'll be able to change that. But I would say as of now, I would expect more run and less pass, kind of as an emphasis compared to last season or the past few seasons.
If you were to describe how tight ends are utilized in this Memphis offense to someone that's never caught a game, how would you describe it?
Yeah, it depends on skill set. I think tight ends are really important. Like they have been. It's kind of been a run of Memphis tight ends for the last decade or so of really, really productive tight ends. And a lot of times what it is somebody who's the kind of pass catching tight end and then somebody who's the blocking tight end or does different kinds of things, comes in on goal line sets and things like that. So they lost Anthony Landfair, who was a first team All AAC tight end because of his pass catching ability. And so I think the biggest thing to replace is they need somebody who can catch passes, because he was a big time, third down type player, especially when you have a quarterback who's coming in, somebody who's probably not going to throw the ball down the field as much. That means tight end is going to be an important position, especially for those types of short to intermediate throws. And so figuring out who that person is going to be is a big one. Jerry Cross, who came in from Penn State, somebody that they were very excited about. We didn't get to see him that much in the spring game because he got hurt kind of right away. going for a pass. And there's a lot of guys there. Christian Ross played well in the spring game. He's been in the program a couple years. And again, Memphis is a place where they do try to develop guys at multiple positions. And so somebody who has been in the program, they're excited about. I think there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of targets that are going to be up for grabs with whoever ends up in that number one tight end spot.
Do you think, similar to like what you mentioned earlier, we see the pass catching guy and the run blocking guy again here in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the scheme looks like overall, kind of as an offense. But I would expect if they can find somebody, especially, I mean, Jerry Cross is he can do some of both, and he's one of those guys when you're just like looking at players pregame or you're looking at players at practice, and you're like, who's the guy who's taller than everybody else? That's Jerry Cross, and so he's a target, like especially in the red zone, he would be somebody who you'd have to look out for constantly. I think that what you would see, is somebody in the middle of the field who's going to make those types of plays. And then when they get to the goal line, they want somebody else who can either play H-back or just play tight end on the other side and be a lead blocker and things like that.
Well, this team's going to run the ball, it sounds like. So let's take a look at the offensive line. And that offensive line will get a facelift here in 2025. Between graduation and the portal, the Tigers will need to replace 7 players. They will be looking to replace their entire line with the exception of left tackle Chris Adams, losing first-team all-conference Xavier Hill to Colorado, which is an obvious big hit, but it's nice having Malachi Breland in the wings, who played pretty well when given his opportunities last season. Other than Adams and Breland, the Tigers only have 2 guys who took snaps in 2024, and they combined for only 10 snaps. How did this staff address those losses?
Yeah, I mean, they knew obviously going back to the winter, they were going to need to replace multiple guys, and then Xavier Hill leaving in the middle of spring creates a whole nother problem because, look, Xavier Hill, when he went in the portal, he was one of the number one players immediately in the portal. He's one of the best offensive linemen in the country. And the thing that made him so valuable to Memphis isn't just how well he played on the interior, it's his versatility. He was basically the backup for every other position on the offensive line. So whenever anybody wasn't playing well or somebody got hurt, he would just go replace them, which means that when you lose him, you basically lost your backup for every position, in addition to a 100% starting caliber first team All AAC type player. So they feel like they've got depth and they can withstand that. But it is the biggest question is you lost your best player, right? Like, so that doesn't mean that you don't have guys who can do the job and guys who can play other positions and things like that. But you do have to be honest about it. They lost their best player in the spring on this unit and one of their best inconsistent players across the team. So I think that's the biggest kind of storyline coming in with this. But at the same time, they brought a lot of guys in and they are excited about what they could do moving forward with this group.
So I guess given the questions, what are the expectations for this room heading into 2025?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, right? Because I just talked about the running game and how important it is and how talented they are at running back. And they're going to run RPOs and they're going to have the quarterback moving. Like, if you can't block anybody, then you can't do any of that stuff, right? You can't just run the ball up the middle if, like, the guys are in the backfield immediately every time. And so realistically, like, this is probably the most important unit, especially on the offense. Obviously, quarterback, it's the most important position, whatever. But the offensive line it's a huge storyline. And again, there's reasons to be optimistic. Chris Adams coming back, I think, is huge. When you bring back your left tackle, especially you guys at a group of 5 school, you guys know there's not a lot of places because they're so valuable if they go in the portal or to find somebody who has multiple years of eligibility, things like that. And so Chris Adams, somebody, Justice knows him, he played at ODU. I'm sure not happy about that, I guess. But like you probably know when he went in the portal last spring, he committed to Washington and then he flipped to Memphis. And so he's somebody who's 100% at power conference level left tackle. Like that's really valuable to have as a building block of the offensive line. And then Travis Burke on the other side of the offensive line, who's a transfer from FIU, he's listed at 6'9". So I don't know how much more you could want in a tackle than someone who's 6'9". And so like they've got building blocks there for the offensive line to be successful, but there are going to be questions about who slots into the interior and then how they play as a unit once they get on the field.
So I feel like the left side of this line is pretty well set. We talked about Chris Adams and then Breland, or they brought in a transfer from Harvard who's not yet on campus. So I'm not sure if maybe Austin Gentle gets in there at left guard, but I assume it's probably one of those two. He was second team All Ivy in 2024 to kind of give some of his accolades. Who do you think we see here at the left guard position?
I think Breland. So Malachi Breland had shoulder surgery. He was out during the spring, and another one. I know I keep saying we're going to get to that, and then I say another one. So he was injured during the spring. They're really excited. I mean, they've been excited about him since he was a true freshman in 2023. This is like one of those guys that the coaches would always talk about. This guy's looking really good in practice. Like, gotta watch out. And then he played kind of for the first time in that Liberty Bowl as a true freshman because guys left and went in the portal before the bowl game, and he played well. And then last year, kind of as a redshirt freshman, he ended up starting, I think, half the games or something. Assuming he's healthy and he's expected to be healthy before fall camp kicks off, I think he's going to be a starter. Like, I think that they view him as a starter, and this is kind of his time to prove that and be a full-time starter. And so I think, yeah, I would expect him to be the starter there, again, assuming health.
All right, so we got the left side figured out. How do you see the center position and the right side panning out?
Yeah, so I mean, another situation where obviously Xavier Hill would have been big. I think Yakiri Walker, who's a transfer from Colorado at center, is a good bet to play there. He's somebody who's been successful. He was at Connecticut and has been a successful player, and they're confident in on the interior. Parker Mitchell is somebody who's another transfer. I think has a shot at getting one of those spots. They're still bringing guys in during the spring too. Like those are the positions where the competition is going to continue on the interior of the offensive line, I think. And then I mentioned Travis Burke at tackle. I think he's the guy. Again, you walk down, look at the team, and say which guy's standing out. It's always going to be the tallest guy who was huge and was pretty good at FIU. So that's not how you should decide who starters are, right? Like, if I was a coach, that's not how I would decide, but it does help, especially on the offensive line. And so, yeah, I do think the interior, especially like at guard, that's going to be a competition throughout the summer.
All right, if you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
I think I just have to stick with Sutton Smith. I think he's been my breakout player for the last 3 years. And so this is the year. I mean, look, 2 years ago, there was kind of a question about the split between him and Blake Watson. It ended up being Blake Watson, as I mentioned, another former ODU player. I don't know how I just managed to get all these in there. I promise it was not intentional. But I think so. I mean, he was somebody they're very excited about as a true freshman. Then he plays a little bit more as a sophomore, and coming into his junior season was supposed to be his junior season. Everybody was kind of like, now is his time. And I remember even talking to him about it before the season, feeling like he was finally ready mentally, physically for being the number one guy and for doing all those things, because we've seen him do all of those things on a very like kind of small sample size. And then that was the moment last year when it felt like now we're going to see it on a bigger scale. And it doesn't mean he's going to be an every down back. He's not a run between the tackles type guy. And that's why I think some Memphis fans even have kind of tried to dial it back on the Sutton Smith hype, saying like, I don't think this guy can be an every down running back. He doesn't need to be that. He just needs to do what he's done over those 2 seasons in a bigger sample size and more consistently. And if he does, I mean, this is somebody who like is a legitimate superstar breakout candidate, like especially in this conference. This is talent-wise somebody who can rip up this conference. It's just 100%. If everything comes together for him and he stays healthy and they find the role for him and they design the offense around his skill set, this is somebody who can be the best player on this team. And the guy who every week you say, did you see what that Sutton Smith guy did? The guy at Memphis, that running back, he's the next running back from Memphis. I think he has that potential. And again, I think this is the year where we're probably going to be able to see that. And it's going to be interesting to see if it all kind of comes together.
For those not familiar with Memphis's defensive scheme, how would you describe it?
Chaos would be the one word. I think it's basically, I mean, look, it's obviously when you look at it week to week, it ends up being pretty consistently a 3-3-5. You're looking at 3 high safeties most of the time. That's been the way that Jordan Hankins, the defensive coordinator, has played most of his career. But he said before last season when he took over as defensive coordinator, like, I'm going to change. Every week is a new week. I'm going to change the scheme or whatever. And I don't think a lot of people believed him because that sounds crazy to do that. He did it against Navy. He just said, we're going to run a new scheme. And it didn't work. It didn't work at all. So we saw it to less extent sometimes throughout the season of like, we're just going to start lining this guy up on the other side of the line, or we're just going to put a linebacker over here now. It's basically the strength of the defense is the linebackers. The defense is built around the linebackers. And again, those 3 high safeties are kind of critical, especially with one of them a lot of times basically playing as a linebacker. Tried to do that a lot last season. but the defense is built around speed and it's built around confusing the offense. And so that's why I say chaos to start off, because the point is for the offense is to not ever be kind of confident or comfortable with what the defense is giving them and try to switch anytime they do feel confident. And so it can be difficult to kind of pin down what they're doing a lot of times. It doesn't always work. That's the thing. Like sometimes they get confused themselves and then that leads to the offense being successful. But it is fun to watch because there's always going to be something to watch.
Well, there are a lot of new faces all over this defense. But let's start with the guys up front along the defensive line. 8 of the 15 guys who took a snap for the Tigers defensive line in 2024 are now gone, whether it was by graduation or the portal. One of the 7 guys returning will be a big part of this defensive line. That's none other than first-team all-conference edge William Whitlow Jr. Whitlow created the second most pressures on the team last season with 33 and was second in sacks with 6. The staff also added 6 transfers to this defensive line, but maybe none bigger than Puda Walker from Kennesaw State. How did that unit look and come together this spring?
Yeah, I think a lot of kind of ins and outs, because William Whitlow Jr. obviously went in the portal after the season ended and then got offers from power conference teams and then decided to come back. And so that kind of changes the whole building of this unit, because with him coming back, you have a guaranteed kind of cornerstone of not only this unit but of the whole defense. And that's going to change what you're going to do elsewhere. A lot of what we've seen from the defensive line was there was a lot of rotation last year. I would expect that to continue. And a lot of it is clearing kind of space for linebackers. So a lot of what we're seeing is not necessarily huge sack numbers. Now, I think, and I thought last year too, like if they had somebody who could consistently get to the quarterback, that would be kind of a game changer for the way they're playing. But the way they're playing is they're going to use the defensive line to clear space for the linebackers and for the rest of the defense. And so you're looking for big bodies, you're looking for guys that can play a couple snaps and then go out and somebody else comes in. And so that's why we kind of look at this unit. You mentioned a lot of guys there, and they've brought in a lot of transfers also in the spring because it's clearly a place they're trying to reload. But it is a lot of, okay, this guy's the starter, but he's going to play the same amount of snaps as the guys behind him, right? Because they're going to be coming in and out constantly. And so a lot of it is just the way the unit is going to function as a whole instead of individual guys. And it'll be interesting to see those still with all those new guys who kind of emerges as they get to the summer and closer to the start of the season.
Well, it seems like in the portal, they've really focused on the guys on that interior of the line. Obviously, getting Whitlow back is huge. So it's safe to say, like getting him back, and then the other guys, they're kind of happy with the guys on the defensive end.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the guys too they brought in, Marcus Burris is a name definitely from Indiana, somebody who had just visited Tennessee and then came to Memphis and committed to Memphis. That's somebody they're excited about as kind of a reinforcement on that part of the line. And then there are guys that have been in the program. I mean, Reggie Grimes is somebody who came in last year. They were excited about. He'll be in the program. And then obviously with Whitlow, you have kind of a guaranteed starter on one side, which is huge. So you're looking for, 2 other spots where you've got a lot of options. And so I think they're confident with the group they have. And it's one of those things where maybe somebody starts as a backup game 1, and then by the middle of the season or the end of the season, they've emerged as a starter, because I think it's going to be production. It's going to be who has the biggest impact when they're in there. And I think a lot of guys are going to get opportunities.
As I mentioned before, the Puda Walker signing was big. I think when he entered the portal, like he was immediately one of the best defensive tackles in the portal. What are the expectations of him heading into 2025?
Yeah, I think he was the first commit that Memphis had out of the portal going back to the end of last season, because he went in like before the season ended because Kennesaw State fired their coach. And yeah, somebody who like right away it was like, okay, Memphis is doing it again with the recruiting, right? Like they're going to have the number 1 class, which it seems like they do pretty much every year in terms of recruiting. And I think Puda Walker is someone that they're really excited about, because with all that stuff I just talked about, he's somebody who could slot in on the other side and of Whitlow and be really productive. And if you can prove, at the group of 5 level, you can prove that you're productive somewhere else, that really gives you a leg up when you come into these competitions, because then it's like, okay, I know you can do this. Obviously a little bit of a higher level here, but pretty comparable in terms of someone who's done it and has the skill set. And so I think definitely has every opportunity to be at the front of that room in that rotation when they get to the start of the season.
Who in this room do you feel is ready to kind of take their game to the next level or make a jump here in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think
I think Whitlow is somebody who can take an even bigger jump going into next season. Basically, he's somebody obviously came back and was really successful last year, but a lot of what he did on the defensive line was kind of clearing space, like I said, for other people and having an impact on the game that doesn't necessarily show up on the stat sheet. Like if you look at his stats, it doesn't jump off the page, even though obviously he ends up being a first team all AAC guy. And I think with this defense, him coming back, one of the reasons was the defense is going to be built around him. He knew that when he talked to Jordan Hankins about what to expect coming into this season. And so now he's going to have the opportunity to rush the passer more probably and to have a bigger impact and to kind of have the rest of the defense funneling things towards him so that he can have that impact and even take another step and be somebody who's kind of on a national stage in terms of his impact on the game and beyond just being an all conference guy, be somebody who's really known nationally as somebody who's wreaking havoc up front consistently on a defensive line.
Like you said, this defense is going to be built around these linebackers, and the Tigers will need to figure out those linebackers and who they are going to be this season. You got Bryce Edmondson. He left for UNLV. You got Elijah Herrings off to FSU while their tackling machine. And first-team all-conference linebacker Chandler Martin has graduated. The Tigers have a handful of guys who saw 2 or 3 games of action, and the staff has added 6 guys from the portal. How did this group look in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, this is the group where there's kind of the most competition to me because you lost all 3 starters and you need to replace them. And like we just talked about, this is always going to be the core of the team. This is kind of the thing. Jordan Hankins, when he was a player, he was a linebacker. And since he's been a coach everywhere he's been, it's been about linebackers. It's always been about linebackers. He was the linebackers coach at Memphis before he got elevated to defensive coordinator. And that's the group he's going to build his defense around. And so even though we're looking at this and we're not seeing a lot of returning production, I'm pretty confident at Memphis. I'm pretty confident that this is going to be the strength of the team. And it's tough to call in terms of who's going to be on the field because there's more than 3 guys who were starters, and not only were starters, were like productive starters last year at other schools. And so kind of what I was saying before, competition wise, this has been the strongest because you're talking about guys who are really in competition for 3 spots, but who all played and already had those spots last year. And so the way that develops as it goes into the season is going to be really interesting.
Did anyone stand out in the spring to you?
Here's the thing. We don't get to watch I don't get to report on anything during the spring, unlike a lot of other schools. So I can't say what I saw in practice. Not that I saw very much, but I think Everett Rousseau, somebody who came from UAB, I think he like they're very excited about him and obviously someone who they played against and was in this conference. And I kind of just I wrote a story about this earlier in the offseason. Like you just look at these guys. Everett Rousseau has 75 tackles last year at UAB. Cam Burden, 63 tackles at Charlotte. Drew Watts, 65 tackles at Nevada. And then Sam Brumfield, 60 tackles as a starter at Virginia Tech. And so those are 4 guys right there who were like high-level starters last season, and there's probably not spots for all of them to start. And that's before you even get into everybody else they brought in, right? So I think Sam Brumfield, I feel confident, like he's one of those guys that did well, I think, when he got here, and I would expect to be a starter. But all those guys are really talented, and like you could lose one and still feel confident in the room as they go into the season.
So losing Chandler Martin leaves that big leadership void for this defense. Is there a defensive player that you can step into that leadership role?
Yeah, I think Whitlow's is a huge one, especially somebody who's been in the program now for his whole career, for 4+ years, which is just not, you don't hear that anywhere, right? Just being in a program for that long, especially and being like a high-level player. So I think, again, one of the reasons that he came back was to fill that leadership void because, yeah, they lost everybody who was like a leader last year, really on both sides of the ball, which makes it really interesting to see how that develops because that's one of those things that you can't really force as a coach, right? Even if somebody's your best player, that doesn't mean that they're your best leader. Memphis was kind of lucky the past couple of years with guys like Chandler Martin and Seth Hennigan being the leaders and also kind of leading on the field. But yeah, I think the linebacker room is going to have to be a big part of that. I think Sam Brumfield, somebody who's been in college for a while now, he's one of those guys that got an extra year because of the JUCO ruling. So he thought his career was over basically a couple months ago after playing at Virginia Tech, and then ended up getting another year and went in the portal and comes to Memphis. So he's somebody who's very mature. He's played at JUCO. He's played at a high level in the power conferences, and really can fill that spot, I think, in the middle of the defense. And then whoever else ends up as a linebacker, I think is going to be big too.
Well, it's a new year and it's a new secondary for the Tigers here in 2025. Safety Cortland Marsh, who played in 4 games, will be the most experienced Tiger returning in 2025. As for cornerback, Charlie Harrell is the one who took the most snaps in 2024, returning with only 3. The staff hit the portal hard, grabbing 11 guys. What should we expect from the secondary in 2025?
Yeah, a great question, because a lot of unknowns. Like, in terms of also when you lose guys, like you kind of just mentioned it there, it's one thing to lose your starters. It's another thing to lose like your entire depth chart, which is basically what happened at cornerback. You're trying to replace guys, and this is it's reasonable to be a little bit concerned, because this is a position where there has been problems the past couple of years, not really last year, but before that. The secondary depth last year was a problem in the secondary. Like they had 2 guys, especially at cornerback, they were confident in Kobe Minor and Davion Ross. Obviously, both those guys are gone off to the NFL now, and there wasn't a lot behind them, and they lost all those guys anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter. But at safety, too, it was kind of a revolving door. Again, if you're going to play 3 safeties consistently, then you need a lot of safeties. And we had a situation where Darius Coffey was a starter, and then Taj Rael was a starter, and then he left the team, and then Cortland Marsh was injured, and then he came back, and he played really well at the end of the season. But I think safety is a big one. There's a lot of opportunity there, like for guys who came in, because they're going to play 3 safeties. And there's only one guy who we can say 100% is going to be a starter in Cortland Marsh. And then at cornerback, you got 2 spots up for grabs, and a lot of guys coming in who have some experience other places, but not a lot of necessarily returning production. And so, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one too.
Given all the transfers and newcomers to the secondary, which of these guys do you think can have the biggest impact here in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, one guy I would say kind of throughout the spring, one of the things that we do, I guess maybe it's like a trick or whatever as a reporter, right, is like whenever you hear coaches, you ask them questions, not about specific guys, but just like, who's standing out or whatever, or just anytime they bring somebody up without having been asked about them, you kind of make a note of it of like, okay, he brought that guy up again, so he's obviously thinking about him. The name that I think has come up the most throughout the entire spring, maybe even on both sides of the ball, is Duke Cooper, Amarian Cooper. He's known as Duke. Like, he basically comes up every single position coach, even the special teams coach is kind of going out his way to be like, this guy, Duke Cooper, is really good. And that tells me, like, look, he's obviously done something. They're very excited about him, and they think that he can be a starter for them and be a consistent player. And he's an interesting one. Like, he played at Florida State, then he went to Colorado, then he went back to Florida State, didn't play at all last year, and then he came to Memphis this year. So he's been at multiple power conference programs. He's played, like, you can go find his highlights from Colorado and from Florida State the first time. So somebody who has that kind of pedigree. And again, the opportunity is there, right? They need multiple guys to start at these positions. And so I would put him as one of those guys. I think safety, Chris Bracey is an interesting one, a transfer from UAB. Again, somebody who obviously knows this team and knows this conference, has played against Memphis and played well before he got injured last year for UAB. And then there's a lot of other guys. Kamari Wilson, someone who came in from Arizona State. Kenny Dillingham was talking pretty highly of him in the past. And so obviously has the pedigree. That's going to be one where at safety, there's opportunities for guys to kind of emerge next to Cortland Marsh.
All right. If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who you got?
I was going to go Duke Cooper, but I just went on a whole thing about him. So I'll switch. I think I'm going to go Cortland Marsh, because I think he basically flew under the radar last year because he got injured at the beginning of the season in training camp. And Ryan Silverfield said that he thought he was going to miss the whole season. So we said, okay, that he was projected to be a starter before then, but then he was going to miss the season. Then he comes back towards the end of the season. He had like an arm injury, but it healed enough that he was able to play. And if you look at the last couple games, especially the last regular season game against Tulane and the bowl game against West Virginia, like, he was basically one of Memphis' best players on either side of the ball. And it was weird because it was like, okay, well, who is this guy? He hasn't really played that much all season. They've been trying to find a safety, and they don't know who's going to play there. And he ended up just being their starting safety, especially as somebody who can come in having not played the whole season or ever played for Memphis and then just be a starter basically 2 games in. Is pretty interesting and pretty like crazy when you think about it. And so now he has a whole offseason to prepare. And not only that, he knows he's going to be a starter and he's going to be a huge part of this defense. And I think based on what he did in those 2 games, he's somebody who, like, 100% I would think can be a first team all AAC guy and can be one of the best safeties in this conference. And I think he's going to take some people are not going to, they're not looking for it because they didn't see the production last year, but I think he can do it. And I think he's going to do it this season.
Well, we've talked offense and defense. Let's move over to the special teams. The Memphis always seems to have a really strong kicking game. But how are the special teams units looking, and are there any concerns?
Yeah, I mean, they've had some concerns the past couple of years. I think like the past 2 seasons, since I've been on the beat, like, it feels like almost every game we show up and we're trying to figure out who the kicker is going to be like before the game starts. Now some of those guys have been good, especially on kickoffs. Like Tristan Vandenberg was really good on kickoffs last year. Like basically in terms of kick coverage, they didn't have to do it because he just kicked out of the end zone every time. So he's gone, but he was not super accurate on field goals. And then Caden Costa came in last year and was kind of supposed to solve that problem and didn't really. And then by the end of the season, it was back and forth between who was going to start like week to week. So they really, for the past 2 years, I mean, they need somebody at kicker who can just come in and be consistent. Like really somebody who can just be the starter all season. That's what the bar is right now, is like, can you hold this job for the whole season? Johnny Spedick is the guy, like, who it has to be, right? He came in from Ohio. He was 13 of 16 last year. They're excited about him. They obviously went out and they knew all this in the transfer portal. They knew they needed to find somebody, and that's the person they went and got. And so you have to at least take some confidence from that. Now there's still competition. He's competing with Oliver Castaneda, who's been here. But again, if you're going to go bring him in the portal, I would expect him to have the first crack at that spot. And they really need somebody who can do that consistently. I don't think they've lost games really the past couple of years, but it has contributed to like choosing to go for it and fourth down a lot more. And that was one of the things. If you go back to the UTSA game last year, Memphis obviously only lost 2 games. And so the Navy game, you kind of say like it was a defensive debacle. That's why they lost. UTSA, there was a lot of specifics, and one of them was fourth downs. And one of the reasons that they went for it so much on fourth downs last year was because of the kicking game. And so even though you think about it, it's not that big of a deal. It does affect how you game plan, how you do other things. And so that's something that I think is worth watching, is how does he do at the beginning of the season, Johnny Spedick, and can he kind of take hold of this job?
Well, now that spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into 2025?
Yeah, I think secondary is probably one. Secondary and offensive line would be the two. I mean, you could throw special teams in there too, but I think secondary, for the reasons I mentioned, just because they lost the 2 guys that they had been confident in and that had been consistent, and then they haven't had a lot. There's no returning production. It's not some guy who was in the program who we think is going to take the next step, anything like that. And then offensive line, because you lost your best player. I think anytime your unit loses your best player, you got to be concerned. And linebacker, I would be concerned, but I think they just brought in so many talented guys that they'll be able to withstand it. Even though I don't see a Chandler Martin in that group. I see a lot of guys who can replace what kind of everybody did collectively. So I think those 2, offensive line and then secondary, are the 2 ones that I would point to. But I still think, like we went through it, there's reasons to be optimistic about both those groups.
In today's age of NIL, revenue sharing, and the transfer portal, how have you seen that change Memphis's recruiting philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, Memphis benefited from it a lot, right? I mean, relative to G5 schools, not necessarily on the bigger scale, but with this FedEx deal that's about a year and a month old, Memphis is competing on a higher level than basically everybody in the group of 5. Now, you have some teams that for some years pop up with more money or specific situations where they can keep players and stuff like that. But you look at the recruiting rankings, and Memphis is pretty much at the top group of 5 wise consistently. And a big reason for that is that they have the resources to be able to recruit at that level. And so it's good for them in that sense. Now, this is also a program that an athletic department that desperately wants to get out of the group of 5 and into the Power 4. And so they want to be on that level, which is a whole other financial kind of commitment, which they aren't at right now. But it depends on how you go through those things. But I think it's been big for them. And in this space they're in right now, they're positioned to be at or near the top of the group of 5 pretty much every season.
How do you think like the AAC commitment with that $10 million for each program, how that might change things for Memphis or just the AAC in general?
Yeah, I think Memphis was going to be above that regardless. So I don't think I think that's something that Memphis wanted. I mean, Memphis AD Ed Scott has said it going back to last summer that he wanted that because you want other teams in your conference to be meeting that level. But it's more about Memphis saying, hey, can you guys get up to where we are? Like we're above that number. We need everybody to get close to us so that we can drive the level of this league up higher. And it's been at a fine level, I think. But even within the conference, Memphis is outspending all these other teams. Like you heard before last year when they played UTSA, Jeff Traylor kind of just openly saying like their team has cost 6 times as much, I think is what he said, as ours does. drew a lot of like back and forth between the teams, and then UTSA went out there and won the game. And so that was the end of that. I think it would have been, but a lot of fans viewed it as like, oh, you're making an excuse for that. It's also just the reality. Like, I think it's fair in terms of the numbers that he was kind of throwing out there about how much money Memphis has and how much money these other programs have. And so with those numbers and with those kind of commitments are going to come higher expectations. And I think that like you said, the 10 million, when they get to that, it's going to be good for Memphis because it's going to drive everybody else and it's going to make the league more competitive. But in terms of them getting there, that wasn't a concern. I think they always wanted to be well above that.
How do you feel the staff here at Memphis is doing navigating the portal?
They've been really successful. I mean, it's interesting. They haven't approached it the same way as a lot of these schools have, with like hiring someone and saying that they're a salary cap manager, they have a general manager, but they basically operated as kind of a director of recruiting. It is one of those programs where that you talk about a revolving door, like general manager has been, or recruiting director, whatever you want to call it. I think they've had a different recruiting director every year for the past 4 years now. So it's been one of those, like, somebody comes in, they do this and they leave. Somebody comes in, they do this, they leave. And that's just how it is. People don't really talk about turnover in terms of staff and coaches. They talk about it with the players, but man, like, you talk about how often these guys are going in and out of different programs. It's really crazy. But again, this is a program with coach consistency, I think, is the biggest thing. You're talking about coordinators who have been here multiple years and a coach who's been here for a while. That really helps you in recruiting, because then you're recruiting on consistency, you're recruiting on familiarity, and it helps you. And then obviously you have the resources to be able to kind of match what other programs and exceed what other programs are doing.
I think you've done a good job of laying this question out throughout the interview today, but what do you think the main strength of this 2025 team will be?
Yeah, I mean, like, overall talent level, I think, like I just talked about, but I think running back, the position group, I mean, that's what it's going to have to be. I mean, if they're going to get to the level that they want to be at and where they were picked to be kind of last year and where they honestly have the talent to be and should be, it's going to have to be because Sutton Smith and Greg DeWosier have big seasons and just are dynamic and cause problems for other defenses all season. I think that's just what's going to have to be, unless there's some unexpected kind of breakout. And I think they're positioned to do that too. I don't think it's crazy to expect that suddenly we're going to be talking about this crazy running back tandem that Memphis has and how they're kind of taking over the league or whatever it is. But I think that's the strength of this team in terms of the talent, the returning talent, especially two guys who were in the program last year. Because again, we don't see that very often at different places. And yeah, to me, like, that's the group that I would point to right now and say that's the strength. And those are the guys that are going to make it happen this year.
All right. So 2024, you finish 11-2. You start off the season with a big win over Florida State. I think if people weren't really paying attention to Memphis, that really put them on the map there. And I live here in Iowa, and I could just it seemed like even 11-2, win a bowl game, you get a win over Florida State, and it seemed like a down season. What does success look like for the Tigers in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, that's it's a loaded question. And there's a lot of that question causes a lot of arguments, especially in Memphis. It's one of those things where, like, it's interesting that you say that, because, like, I think the perception of success in Memphis versus the perception of success outside of Memphis is totally different. A lot of people, if you don't pay attention to Memphis, you don't pay attention to the Group of Five. You obviously saw, but you're a college football fan or a casual fan. Like, you saw Memphis popping up preseason as like, here's one of the teams that's going to be a Group of Five, potentially playoff team. And then the end of the season, they weren't, but they ended up ranked. So you think, okay, well, they had a good season. The reality is, going into last season, Memphis was, the expectation was you should win the AAC. Memphis was picked to win the AAC preseason. And it wasn't really close. If you look at the preseason poll, there was not a lot of people making cases for Army or Navy to win the preseason. Even Tulane, they lost everybody from last season. They were not getting picked to win the conference. And so you start out with the expectation being you should win the conference. And again, you have the most talent in the conference. That's not even really up for debate, especially now. I think then you go through the season, and not only did you not win the conference, like, it wasn't really even close, because once they lost to UTSA, that was in early November. That was it for Memphis kind of having a chance to make it to the conference title game. And so end up finishing fourth in the conference in a situation where you started the season talking about playing a college football playoff game on the road in December. And you're talking about trying to get in an early bowl game so you can get the season to be over with, basically, and start recruiting for next year. And also last year was supposed to be the culmination of that team, right? Seth Hennigan, Rock Taylor, Chandler Martin, like Greg Rubin, guys who had been together for 2, 3, 4 years, and a returning quarterback who was being considered one of the top quarterbacks in the country, which is kind of unheard of that you have that at a program like this in a group of 5. And you didn't do that. You didn't really even, again, come close to hitting the goal of getting to the conference championship. The playoff was kind of a different one. I think people would have been okay with if they won the conference championship and then, you lost up to Boise State or something like that. That would have been a different conversation. But not getting the conference championship and also showing in that win against Tulane that they had every capability to do that, I think made it harder for people. And then, I mean, this season is a total kind of crapshoot in terms of like, what should the expectations be, right? It's really tough because you have all this talent. We just went through it. I still think Memphis has the most talent of any team in this conference. At the same time, are you going to pick this team to win the conference? Like, you don't have a lot of returning production to look at and say, because of that familiarity, or I know this person is going to perform at this level, so I think they're going to beat this team and this team. Whereas some other teams have more returning production. They have more familiarity, especially with quarterbacks. You look at like Blake Horvath or Owen McCown, right? That's not something that Memphis has, even though they feel confident in their room. And so I think kind of setting the expectations for Memphis this season is going to be really interesting. And there's going to be a lot of debate going into the year.
Well, Jonah, we've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else you want to share or think we should know about this 2025 Memphis Tigers football team?
No, I think we went through it all. I think I really appreciate you guys having me. Crazy. I'm thinking about like last year, it was way different. Like I just talked about when we were doing this last year, and I was like, here's the starters at every position. Here's which games Memphis is going to win and stuff like that. And now I'm like, let's see the team on August 30th, and then I'll let you know.
Well, Jonah, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.